flight mode as we start with our first session. I'll just briefly tell you how we have planned for the day. We start with this first session, which is in the upstream sector. This is then going to be followed, this is going to be a 1.5 hour session, followed by a short break if we can manage a break. Otherwise, 11 o'clock, have our galaxy of our Union Cabinet Ministers joining us to share their key initiatives and measures towards transforming India. And we'll also be having the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, the newly formed state, Shri N. Chandrababu Naidu ji. That's going to be a session which is going to be leading us to lunch and to the next session, which is on downstream sector. Downstream sector, which is again going to be for 90 minutes. We break for lunch. Post that, we have a short session. It's a motivational talk by Sister Shivani of Brahma Kumari and also patriotic songs. That will be then followed. We'll see if we are able to manage the break. Otherwise, we move straight into the last session, the valedictory session, the way forward session, wherein the chief guest is the Honorable Finance Minister, Shri Arun Jaitley ji, joining us in that session. And we'll continue with our technical sessions, which are in hall number 2, 4, 5 and 6 on levels 1 and 2 respectively. The signages are outside. The information regarding the sessions which are there in those respective halls are all displayed outside, and they are also on your tablet and the app which we have extended to you. Any information you can seek from our representatives around here. So we start with the session, and welcome to the session wherein we are talking about the future of upstream, a techno-managerial challenge. Would like to invite the session chair, Mr. Andrew James Belagane, the advisor to the CEO of Rosneft. May I request Mr. Andrew James Belagane to please join us here, the chair of the session. Rosneft, as we all know, this is Russia's leading extraction and refining company, and Mr. Belagane is the advisor to the CEO of Rosneft, who's going to be chairing the session. Our eminent speakers now of the session, inviting Mr. Simon Flowers, the chairman of Wood Mackenzie, a global energy, metals and mining research and consultancy group. Mr. Amarnath, the Joint Secretary, Exploration, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Mr. Utpal Bora, the Chairman and Managing Director of Oil, Asia's oldest and biggest pioneer oil exploration and production company. And inviting now our knowledge partner, Dr. Rahul Panandikar, the partner, BCG, Boston Consulting Group. So as we start the session, I would like to request our knowledge partner to set the context of the theme, and then we flow into the speakers' addresses with the opening remarks of the session chair. Would like to request Mr. Panandikar for his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'll take it upon myself to give you a high-level perspective on the future of the upstream. So this is just about setting the stage for the sessions, for which you'll have all the eminent speakers then giving you their perspectives on where this is headed. And it's very aptly put, as this is, upstream going forward is not just a technical challenge, nor is it just a management challenge. it is a techno-managerial challenge. And I'll use just a few minutes to actually drive that point to you. Let me broadly try to capture in 3 boxes. The first box is what have we observed? And this is not necessarily a micro-level observation. This is an aggregate-level observation. In the sense is what have we observed in the sector globally? And what we observed is that even when the oil price was at about $100 a barrel, not today's reality, we still had a situation in which the oil and gas companies were under pressure for several years on the free cash flow part, and hence reinvestment economics or reinvestment money was already a little tight. 2 factors largely contributed to that from a very macro level: an increase in the resource complexity, in the sense that operators and non-operators were spending proportionally more money for getting less returns on the resource that they were exploiting or exploring. And hence there was an element of resource complexity associated with it. And the second thing is, with the increased complexity of actually either exploring or exploiting resources, the types of projects that were being undertaken were gradually and increasingly more complex. Now, clearly, since the time of mid-2014, this situation has clearly exacerbated. The fact that the oil price has dropped dramatically has actually made many of the upstream players refocus their efforts on actually making sure that the short term is taken care of also. And they've responded with short-term measures that have aggressively targeted both the rationalization of operational expenses, the OPEX, and the CAPEX. But besides this, we think there are a few trends that are going to affect the sector going forward. The first is this move from the old world to the new world necessarily needs a thought and an extra reflection on project efficiency and the deployment of capital with regard to the projects. The second, instead of doing everything in-house, we're probably entering a world in which collaboration with different industry stakeholders may become more of the norm. This is both a way of actually doing some risk sharing, as well as bringing the best of expertise in the sector rather than work in a siloed approach. The third is an excessive focus or an additional focus on your portfolio. People are thinking of returning back to their roots, back to their DNA, and sticking with the core competence and with a focus on cash generation of their portfolio rather than exploring more. And finally, one key stakeholder in this entire piece, the governments. In an environment where the left side of the supply curve becomes even more critical and relevant, and cash costs associated with government take become important, governments also play a very important role in making sure this upstream sector is viable. And hence, all upstream players need to think about this challenge, one, from a technical perspective, how do we deal with resource complexity? But then also from a managerial perspective, how do we deal with the project complexities that are coming about? I'll just take a couple of minutes to actually show that this is a little data-driven. If you look at the free cash flow, even when the Brent prices were very high, in the years between about 2011 and 2013, we could see the pressure and tightening on different parts of the value chain. And the upstream part was clearly suffering from a tightening of the value chain economics. And the margins, which were at a healthy 8 to 10%, had already dropped to half that number even before the price drop happened. And hence, with the price drop, this situation has gotten much worse. While the expenses and the costs associated with exploration have gone up 6x in the period between 2000 and 2015, the proportionate finding of resources has not kept up to the mark. It's been only about 2 times that number. So 6 times increase in exploration costs, only 2 times increase in resources available. The production costs have also gone up. While the left-hand side of this graph shows us the aggregate of almost 380 upstream companies, the right-hand graph only focuses on the top operators. And in the top operators, you see a dramatic increase in the production costs per barrel. When we look at an evolution of where exploration and actually production is happening from, whether it is on water depth or whether it is distance offshore, we see that this situation shows that the resource complexity is going up. We're progressively looking for oil and gas further away from the shore and deeper into the oceans. And hence, this already puts across the point of resource complexity. Additionally, quote unquote, the productivity of the capex that you're deploying also has gone down, which is the global oil and gas production per day has gone down, even while the capex spend has gone up. And hence the productivity of the capital that is being deployed also has gone down. Now something on the project complexity. If you look at a tabulation of the biggest projects between the period 2012 and 2015, on average, there was a project delay of 5 to 15 months and an overrun on costs of between 5 and 35%. This is clearly telling us that while we're taking on projects that are far more complex, we need to involve more technology, more technical companies. This increases the complexity associated with stakeholder management. This increases the complexity of managing different suppliers, and hence keeping our projects on time and on budget have become a very, very important challenge when we look at the upstream companies. Needless to say, people have reacted and reacted quickly. And the first thing to go out is there's been a dramatic decrease in exploration spend. And if you look across the board, and we just put across a sample, anything between 10 to 30% of capex costs have been taken out. There's numbers floating around that the total decrease in expenditure of the sector has gone down by 1 trillion. Approximately half of that can be attributed to actually a reduction in capex spend directly. While on the capex, there have been very clear cuts, there have been actually very, very aggressive moves on the opex front as well. And whether people are rationalizing and optimizing the internal pyramid and moving into more lean operations, many of the supplier contracts are also getting renegotiated. And hence, there have been an aggressive move by both parties when it comes, from the upstream players when it comes to reducing both capex and opex. There are 4 trends, as I mentioned, that I will go through very quickly. The first, there's very clear drive towards project efficiency. The second, we see more trends toward industry collaboration. Instead of thinking of doing everything in-house, people are partnering up front and looking for solutions up front. A classic one is the Det-Norsk Acre Solutions and Subsea 7 partnership, where they're looking to use the know-how with Aker Solutions to create subsea architectures that are more cost efficient. The third one is a portfolio-driven mindset with 3 objectives. 1, to lower cost, to really want to move to the left side of the supply curve on the oil and gas front globally. Second is to specialize. Instead of doing, we can do everything, we know how to do everything, this is about actually getting back to the core and adjusting operating models to make sure that we are operating in our core. And finally, an immediate response, which is very managerial, which is about how do we harvest the resources that we already have quickly. And hence there is a refocus from the point of view of the portfolio. Finally, the point on renegotiating government take. There is the element that is associated with tax reform, and we see clear examples on where people are headed with tax reform. But there is also the movement on actually thinking about the change of the regime itself, the fiscal regime. And we've got examples of both. Now, these 4 trends that I mentioned, we see are the mid to long-term trends that are probably there for a long time to stay that the upstream sector has to deal with. And if I were to summarize it, if the old world was about let's produce more and more oil and gas, the new world is about how can we focus on value. If the old world was about the big gambles, the multi-billion-dollar projects, people are looking more and more for optionality and the strategic logic behind the large investments. If the old world was about saying we want the best and the most modern technical and technological solution, people are looking at more on continuous improvement. People are looking at more on customization and standardization so that we can keep our project costs down. And finally, in a world where people thought about actually internalizing most of the functions and most of the expertise, we're moving into a world more on the collaboration side and looking to seek out synergies, which were in the past our suppliers, who should now be our partners. And so when we look at it from a sort of a Pentagon framework, in which the first thing that I think we dramatically need to think about is a cultural revolution, a cost consciousness that has to come into every upstream company. This is more than just cutting costs. This is cost consciousness that will go a long way. It's a cultural change in the organization. Second is this whole element of supplier collaboration. It will require a whole change in mindset for us as to how we are going to start working with our supplier. The traditional buyer-supplier relationship needs to break down and figure out how a risk-sharing agreement can come into so that we can attack the problems both on the resource side and the project side together. The third, every company will have to rethink the operating model that they need to be setting up. Are you operators, non-operators? And hence, what are the type of lean operations that you need to get into almost in a factory mode that you need to respond to the reality? The fourth is a very cold look at the portfolio and balancing out exploration and exploitation. And finally, the element of working with the government to figure out how this sector can become viable at these price points. Okay? With that, I'll stop. Thank you so much.
Dr. Arul, thank you very much for your opening comments there. Given our time pressures, let's just go straight on and ask Mr. Flowers now to speak. Well done.
CEOs, dignitaries, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm here to talk about the risks and rewards of going digital in upstream. Now, these are challenging times for our industry. You don't need me to tell you. Oil prices will average a mere $45 or so in 2016, the lowest in a dozen years in real terms. Now, after last week's OPEC meeting, the outlook is just a little bit brighter for 2017 than it might have been. But there are dark clouds on the horizon which will challenge the upstream industry and force companies to adapt. The advent of tight oil has already changed the supply side of oil markets, and the threat to demand from climate change policy and technologies like electric vehicles also challenge the traditional view of oil market fundamentals, perhaps even the upstream business model as we know it. Now, these secular shifts increase the risk that oil prices might be lower for longer, and companies need to think differently about their business and how they run it. If our industry is to attract capital, an upstream portfolio has to perform profitably and be sustainable at low oil prices as well as high. Now, the oil industry prides itself on its ability to adapt and evolve, and this has been proven with each generation. In the careers of many of us in this room, the industry has broken many new barriers, from nodding donkeys to offshore development, the arrival of 3D seismic, new frontiers in ultra-deep water and other hostile environments, the shift from vertical to horizontal drilling, and to the multi-stage fracking of low permeability reservoirs that characterize tight oil and shale gas. But we have to recognize that upstream portfolios today, built up in the supercycle, may not be fit for future. Outside the Middle East, there is relatively cheap oil which can be developed under $60 a barrel over the next decade, most of it in tight oil in the Permian and mid-continent basins of the US. But a lot of the accessible conventional resource, oil and gas, including many deep water discoveries and LNG projects, is expensive, with break-even costs in excess of $60 a barrel. Technology has to play a part, a big part, in getting these costs down. But is the oil and gas sector at the leading edge of technology compared with other industrial sectors? I think the honest answer is no, and it's now time to move into the 21st century. So how do we do it? Now, the new mantra is managing for margin. And this means running the business at the lowest cost and capturing the maximum margin as a price taker. At a basic level, companies need to refocus on day-to-day control of the detail, the allocation of human capital and right-sizing, analyzing the individual asset performance and profitability, as Rahul touched on, managing operations and processes more efficiently, understanding the supply chain and contractors. And going digital has a big role to play in managing for margin. And I'd like to define 3 interconnected parts of the digital opportunity. First, big data. Now, upstream operations are extremely data rich, from shooting seismic through exploration into development drilling and production wells, and export through topside facilities to pipelines. There is a vast amount of data, and we can use technology to capture these billions of data points, putting together different data streams from across the value chain, including real-time data. We can then make the most of our data by collaborating with partners, tapping into a global network of specialists. Data analytics will help us optimize each part of the chain using predictive monitoring, assessing tiny changes in vibration, pressure and temperature, among other metrics. Being able to detect equipment failure or risk of failure before it happens will save time and money. Unplanned outages are expensive, a stitch in time. Now, this type of analysis will help operations run more efficiently, maximize production, and even increase reserves, and smooth the processing of crude oil or gas through the system and onwards to the export pipeline and market. We can also use big data and analytics to manage logistics, inventory, and spares far more effectively than we do now. A second part of the digital package is automation and robotics. Now, Rio Tinto started using driverless trucks to shift iron ore at its giant open-cast mines in Western Australia 2 years ago. We need to look for similar opportunities. And the upstream industry can look to unmanned platforms and remote control robots for processes on the platform, downhole, or in the pipeline. Drones and robotic submarines will enable access for monitoring and diagnosis in remote locations. These present opportunities to improve efficiency and safety, and the potential to cut costs could be material. Since 2014, some operators have already reduced the number of employees by 25% as they right-size their business in response to lower oil prices. We think there's an opportunity in the next 5 years to achieve at least the same again, perhaps another third, through automation and robotics. Now, thirdly, visualization. Now, visualizing a process before work has begun helps predict system behavior and quantify and manage risk. A virtual dry run can also deliver efficiency gains. A good example would be improving performance in maintenance programs. Now, visualization would use all of the data available from previous workovers and current well performance. The data can be combined with simulations to improve and optimize the engineering plan for the workover. And the dry run can reveal potential stress points in the process, enabling the operator to identify and anticipate potential problems, raising performance and saving time and money. Now, can the oil industry embrace all of this? Now, most likely, not on their own. Oil and gas companies may not themselves have the skills or know-how to make the most of the opportunities in digitalization. Bringing in the right partners, high-tech specialist service providers to work with the operator will be critical for the successful outcome. And there might be many different partnerships for different parts of the value chain. Does India have a role to play? Yes, for sure. India has embraced digital high-tech, and many of the leading technology and service companies operate here. India is in a very good position to be a leader in this field. Now, of course, there will be risks in going digital. Some are generic risks we're all familiar with in our 21st century lives. Vulnerability to power interruptions, cyber hacking, and dependence on the cloud, to name but three. But can the industry afford not to? Going digital may be the only way that the industry can stay competitive, faced with exploiting resources in the ground that are increasingly technically challenging. And this in a world where oil and gas prices may remain modest, subdued by plentiful supply, climate change policy, and the disruptive threat from renewables and electric vehicles. Can we quantify the rewards of going digital? Now, we at Wood Mackenzie looked at the effect of technology improvements on 10 high-profile pre-FID projects globally. We calculated $21 billion of extra net present value could come from these improvements compared with our base case valuation of these projects. And the extra value was a result of technology improvement in two areas: volumes, with earlier production and higher reserves, and costs with both lower capital and operating expenditure. Going digital can win the industry more reserves, more cheaply, and more safely. In short, more profitably. I think going digital is the only way forward, and it will open up a new era of oil and gas extraction in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. I'll now ask Mr. Amar Nath, the Joint Secretary of Exploration from the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, to speak.
Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. Today's topic, future of upstream, a techno-managerial challenge. I don't think there should have been any doubt about the future of upstream, especially as far as India is concerned. as Prime Minister laid down in his inaugural address, that our future for energy has 4 pillars. Accessibility, it should be accessible to all people. Efficiency, efficiency not only in production but utilization and usage. Sustainability, our commitment to the environment, and security, continuous supply to us. So there is no doubt about the future of upstream as far as the Indian market is concerned, but yes, certainly these are challenging environment and the sector will have to work in this environment. I'm not an expert on techno-managerial issues, but I will just set the context of the environment in which we work and just some thoughts, not a very erudite lecture. This is just a highlight about the context in which we are talking. India has almost 18% population of the world, and the median age is 26.9%. That's 50% of people of India are less than 26 years age. And almost 60%, that's 800 million, are less than 35 years of age. This shows the young population of the country. Our area is just 2.4% and population density of 446 and 32% urbanization. Now just visualize the context, the large size population living in urban areas, moving to urban areas, and young people. This is the market, these are the consumers. But they will turn consumers only when they have money. If they don't have money, they are not consumers. So how to give money to these people is to give jobs to these people. And jobs will be available only you have manufacturing in India, because all these people cannot depend upon agriculture. So manufacturing will have to play a very significant part, and as was pointed out in the inaugural address, that we are planning from 16% manufacturing contribution to 25% by 2022. So this is the size of the change which is going to happen, and the foremost requirement for this is the energy. Energy growth is taking place in India, but worldwide there is almost stagnation in energy growth. 97% of the energy growth has taken place in emerging markets. Now, is there a scenario that world energy growth is stagnant or declining, but it is increasing in India? Can it happen at the expense of reduction in other places? Maybe. And within this change, there could be a change in the energy mix also. That is the scenario we will have to look for. In India, we are producing oil and gas and various energy forms, not only through our public sector units, but private sector also. And private sector has been working for a long time in a very good environment, but all this depends upon the price regime. Price regime is changing, and oil and gas market is not really a free market. All of you know that very few markets will be called free market, where some people combine together and decide the price. That is not a free market, but at the same time, it's very changing very fast. We focus only on supply side, that how to increase efficiency in supply side, but we don't focus on the consumption side. We are producing energy, but how we are consuming energy is we don't hear too much about the consumption chain, and it is having its own impact. The energy is consumed in various sectors. In our urban design, we live at some place, go at some other place, and what is the efficiency of our mobility? A 5-seater car, only one person goes, and the car is stationary for 23 hours. And the engine which we are using hardly uses less than 20% of its efficiency. If you see the overall cost of mobility of a person from place A to place B, you calculate the efficiency of energy uses. That is the focus area where we will have to work, but we have not been able to work. Our cooking efficiency, we use firewood, then we are switching over to LPG also, then PNG also, but this is an area where tremendous requirement is there. Power alternatives. In India, we have our roofs which are exposed. We are heating our roofs with the sun, then we are using ACs to cool that down. I don't know how to describe this unless we look at the focus of energy usage and its efficiency. This is a photo which I just took from the newspaper yesterday, and this is Delhi. Believe it or not, children in Delhi have the lungs of a chain smoker. Now the changes which are taking place because of our consumption pattern are being noticed by the people, and they want that these things should be taken care of. And what is happening is that when we notice these problems, the responses are coming. Governments are taking response in different forms. Whether those are efficient methods or not, we don't know. But when some problem is there, we respond. You might have seen your weather today outside. This is also yesterday's newspaper, that it has been decided that more than 10 years old diesel vehicles will not ply in Delhi. They will not even be parked anywhere in Delhi. You imagine the impact it can have on economic activities and the consequent consumption of energy. We had a scheme called odd even some days back. Again, it is being talked that if this environment which is today, weather which is you are having today, tomorrow if you don't have your vehicle order even, you might face it directly. We had a system called BRT, Bus Rapid Transit. We experimented for 1 or 2 years, then we dismantled it. So what I'm trying to say is that because of the consumption of energy patterns, different kind of issues emerge, and in the absence of clear-cut, laid down long-term long-term solutions, we respond on an ad hoc basis. This is another picture which I just took from yesterday's newspaper. This is a classic example. It has a wellness clinic. It has car which uses energy. It shows some plastics also, and shows some animal also. It's a classic dilemma as well as challenge. And again, we come out with different responses. Plea against plastic bags with NGT. National Green Tribunal. The case is going on for last 3-4 years. The plastic must be banned in Delhi. You never know, tomorrow there could be a decision that ban plastics, and this is the product of Upstream. Now, it is in this context that technology will have to play its part. Some of the issues have been mentioned by Mr. Flower, that we will have to produce very efficiently, and we will have to consume very efficiently, and the technology can be a game changer in changing the whole market. You know about the hydrofracking and horizontal drilling, but in demand side, we have not been able to see too much technical progress. We have a lot of potential of CBM and shale gas in India, but issues regarding water and environment, they are just waiting for you to innovate, and there is a tremendous demand in the market. Methane hydrate technology. We have identified that there is potential, but how do you exploit it at a very efficient and cost-effective pace? And technology is not just the technology, how do you introduce the technology in the system, and how do you manage it? It's very important. Established players may not like new technologies and new innovations to come. There could be a change in mix of the energy uses, and there will be competition between different energy uses. But as was mentioned by one of the speakers, that standardization is absolutely necessary, and reduction of time cycle. When we see exploration periods in India 4-5 years, but actual work is for 3-4 months. So in this context, how to reduce the time cycle is also an important part. And this topic is only techno-managerial, but I say that's not only techno-managerial, it's a regulatory challenge also. There are so many things taking place simultaneously. How do the regulators and government respond? Governments are responsible to all kinds of stakeholders. How do you respond to that? It's a challenge for governments also. We in the government have been trying to take very effective and solid steps in last 2 years. The government, minimum government, maximum governance, that has been our motto. That as far as interface with the government is concerned, it should be very minimal, but a very solid laid down policy-based framework. We have environmental clearances issue. Now we have committed to COP21. Now how do you come out with a technology and challenges, technology and management challenges which takes care of this issue? We have land rights with the farmers. If you are using the facility, how do you share benefits to them? So these are very important things in which we are working. So this is not a scenario which you can take as business as usual. It's not business as usual. It will challenge your thinking to come out with solution. And if we think this as business as usual, then we have a problem. We will have to come out with some solutions. These are some of the policy changes which we have taken in the last 2 years. I will not go into these details. But these are the policy decisions which we have taken, which set the long-term, a solid policy-based framework in which upstream sector will work. And we are still working with the upstream players how to make this more efficient within the framework of ease of doing business. But again, as I said, this is not a business as usual. Some people think that this is business as usual. Our industry is living through a period of profound change, but this is nothing new. But this, I think, is new. Business as usual is not going to work. Now, you are familiar with this figure. When he started, I don't know how many people gave credence to him that he will get actually elected. But he has been elected, and President-elect Donald Trump has broken with decades of diplomatic practice in freewheeling calls with foreign players. He's just picking phone and calling with various leaders as if it's a business deal. I don't know, could be a business deal. This could be a new environment to work. We don't know, but just to highlight that these are the challenges. You will have to take these into account. How many people recognize this figure? Can you raise your hands if anybody recognizes this figure? I don't see anyone. On Sunday, there was a referendum in Italy. He is one of the leaders of a movement who was against that referendum. And the Italian PM has been forced to resign. Now they are talking of ITXT. Brexit, ITXT. Can it break Europe? Can there be a different situation? And how this is going to impact all of us, we don't know. Worldwide, there is a system of anti-establishment, anti-business as usual. So in this environment, not only business has to respond, the governments will also have to respond quickly, otherwise they will not be able to work and survive. We are taking sure-footed steps, taking all factors into consideration, and our system in India is extremely robust. We take account various stakeholders, businesses, people, and rule-based system. So upstream sector in India has a bright future, but we have to take three factors into account. It has to be people-based system. People have to be in the forefront, whether it's environment or its usage of energy, and people are connected. Connected in the sense that earlier you had to book your calls to talk to some people or send letters. But now, before we start talking, simultaneously we are streaming to large number of people. How these people can come together, respond, we don't know, it remains unpredictable. And mobile, not only mobile phone, but mobility, we can travel from one place to another. If we keep these things into account and not take our business as usual, then we can thrive. And India provides a place for such business innovation. In Indian market, you will innovate, you can innovate, and it gives you opportunity to thrive. And we have put a system in place, and we are working with all of you, and we are extremely open. And with these words, I just close my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nath, for an excellent presentation and thought-provoking comments on the current global situation. With that, please, I ask Mr. Utpal Bora to give his talk. Mr.
Chairman of the session, distinguished speakers on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Continuing on the topic of the day, future of upstream, a techno-managerial challenge. In today's perspective, the oil and gas industry, the upstream in particular, is going through a tough phase. The rapid drop in oil prices, down from $100+ in the summer of 2014 to below 30 in the beginning of this year, reflects at the moment excess supply and a relatively weaker global demand. This has resulted in many players in the upstream sector to slash outlay, particularly in exploration, and delaying or deferring project revamping. Again, calls to lessen global warming by curtailing the use of fossil fuels are being issued, and nearly 200 nations at the COP21 summit last year in Paris agreed to a goal of limiting global temperature increases to less than 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. This action appears to represent a collective commitment by nations large and small to decrease dependency on certain fossil fuels in the future. However, despite the increasing discussion surrounding alternate energy and the present glut in oil prices, two facts, at least for the foreseeable future, remain. The global demand for energy will continue to rise, and oil and gas will continue to be a dominant source. And therefore, re-energizing of E&P activities by the upstream towards new discoveries and sustained production will be needed to ensure this long-term supply of energy. In the Indian context, however, our country being a net importer of crude, the upstream scenario is even more challenging. As the country's economy moves on the growth track, demand for energy will continue to increase in the coming years. As such, E&P campaigns need to be stepped up in the Indian subsurface to unlock new hydrocarbon potential and monetizing them at the earliest to reduce import dependency. The oil and gas history of the country dates back to almost over 100 years. The days of easy oil are over, and with depletion of resources, the industry is heading towards complex exploratory and development ventures to renew reserves and increase recovery rates. The upstream segment of the industry is tackling major challenges, working in difficult areas, both in terms of geology and logistics, which require innovative technical and managerial solutions. In land areas, we are moving towards fold belt and trap covered areas, whereas the activity is shifting to deep and ultra-deep waters in the offshore. The shift of oil and gas ventures has made exploration and production cost intensive under a high level of uncertainty. This is an environmental volatility of oil and gas prices. Additionally, at a different level, with environmental and community-driven concerns taking a front seat, the access to reserves is fraught with constraints. Therefore, if you look at what the Indian upstream industry faces today, particularly in finding new supplies in a cost-effective way, the challenges are formidable. Historically, the oil and gas E&P industry has been facing the challenge of volatility of oil and gas prices. Oil and gas prices always remain unpredictable, with its periodic sharp rise and falls. The present dip in oil prices is continuing for a long period, and as a forecast, the oil prices is not expected to bounce back to above US dollar 100 level anytime in the near future. Of course, recently, because of the OPEC decision, the prices have crossed the $50 mark, but you can never tell. On the other hand, upstream industry is technology intensive and needs a high level of skill. The upstream industry is also knowledge-based and requires great expertise. Thus, the industry is faced with a dichotomy. On one hand, it has to develop new technology on a continuous basis, and on the other hand, the technology induction must help in achieving the objective of lowering the cost. This challenge is mitigated by the upstream industry with implementation of a definite business model. During the low oil and gas price periods, E&P companies reduce their level of activities. In general, and in particular, the exploration activities are curtailed. The volatility in oil and gas prices poses greater challenge for service companies. In general, lowering of activities in the industry has direct implications on the oilfield service sector, and the service providers have resorted to reduction of their costs. In recent times, the oil companies, whether they be the national oil companies or the international oil companies, have not been investing on in-house R&D. The same has been delegated to the oilfield service companies or to the universities, educational institutions. The oilfield service sector puts its effort on R&D so that they can create products or services which are niche to themselves. This makes R&D effort a necessary condition for survival of a service company. The service providers always preferred a business model which balanced R&D expenditure with profitability in a low oil price scenario. The low oil price is always accompanied by a reduction in manpower by E&P operators and service providers. Many experienced professionals have had to leave the industry, creating a manpower vacuum, leading to a shortage of experienced professionals in the industry. This problem may become more severe in days to come because the skill set requirement of the industry is moving towards highly skilled, adept with high technology. Now let's highlight the challenges facing the industry in a country. Our country imports about 80% of our oil requirements and about 40% of our gas needs. In order to sustain the envisaged high growth rate of around 8%, the energy requirement is expected to go even further. In such a scenario, it is the prime concern of upstream professionals to put in their best efforts towards the nation's plan for reduction of import dependency of oil and gas by 10% by the year 2022, as spelled out by our Honorable Prime Minister. The oil industry has a long gestation period, and whatever action is initiated now will take about a number of years to bear fruit. In such circumstances, the following multi-pronged actions are contemplated to face the challenges. We first take up EOR, enhanced oil recovery. In our country, most of the oil fields are aging. Increased focus on enhanced oil recovery will help in sustaining production from such oil fields. However, despite many years of pilots and projects, EOR is still considered a technological frontier, as most techniques are expensive depending on complexity and field size. EOR projects are also characterized by long lead times on to production. However, a proper strategy needs to be adopted by E&P operators with collaboration with experts in this field of R&D teams to invest on cost-effective and innovative EOR to extend the life of producing fields. Then next we come to the unexplored and less explored areas. In India, hardly 10% of the basins have been explored, whereas compared to USA where 90% have been explored. The exploration and production of oil and gas is still now limited mainly to a few Category 1 basins. Even parts of Category 1 and 2 basins are not fully explored. It is observed that though in general well density is quite high in parts of Category 1 basins, there are parts of even such basins which are scantily explored. An example to this point is Assam Shelf and Assam Arakan Basin. It may be noted that well density is very high in the Assam Shelf areas and partly in Tripura, whereas in all other parts of the same basin it is abysmally low. In states like Manipur and Mizoram, hardly a few wells have been drilled. Thus, it is necessary to carry out fast-track exploration in all such areas which are either unexplored or scantily explored. The National Seismic Program is a step in this direction. Additionally, reconnaissance geophysical work like airborne, magnetic and gravity survey, satellite studies like thermal modeling, etc. may be done over the entire country on a fast-track basis. Thirdly, exploration of unconventional hydrocarbons. There is a large opportunity for exploration and production of non-conventional hydrocarbons like CBM, shale oil and gas, gas hydrates, etc. Production from CBM has already started. The work on shale gas oil is at its infancy and major work needs to be done in this regard. Both shale resources and CBM production will require huge amounts of land and water, and optimization needs to be done here. Moreover, there are environmental issues regarding production of these unconventional hydrocarbons for which adequate legislative framework is necessary. India is blessed out with a huge resource of gas hydrates. It is the fuel of the future. However, its production is a safety hazard and a technology is yet to be established or proved to produce from these gas hydrates. India needs to invest on research on the production of problems of gas hydrates. There is a national gas hydrate program on in the country, but it needs to be more active and purposeful. Additionally, at this juncture, we need to emphasize that with introduction of HELP, the Hydrocarbon Exploration License Policy, major regulatory framework has been set in place towards exploration of conventional and unconventional hydrocarbons. But the current industry needs more regulatory changes and more fiscal incentives like reduction in cess and moderate royalty rates. Finally, the upstream is a technologically challenging industry and we need to cater to the energy requirement of our country. The path ahead is difficult and arduous, and we in the industry have to live up to the challenges to meet the expectations of the country. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bora, thank you very much. I was told before we started our session today that the most important thing was we finished on time because there's a ministerial session following us. We are well on time, and if you will, I'll take the privilege of being a chairman to say a few things and maybe tie a few of the comments made by my fellow speakers here this morning and put it maybe in the context of my company, Rosneft, and also what we're doing in India. And I'll start by just reviewing, and the crowd has filled out a little bit from when we started, so some of you may have missed what Dr. Rule said at the beginning of our session. He talked about how there's increased resource complexity and there's increased project complexity. And he gave a nice, elegant framework of how we might look at this with four elements, one being project efficiency, the second being collaboration, the third, portfolio considerations, and the fourth, the government. We've heard today from Mr. Nath the perspective of the government, and I think he gave us a very good speech explaining how there are national things within India that are being taken into consideration, particularly looking at some of our pollution in cities, what we need to do, how we need to deal with that, how we need to think about the design of our cities and other public policy initiatives. But I'd like to just spend a minute now to pick up on these four themes from the perspective of Rosneft. And certainly when we look at project efficiency, I wish that we could say we were as advanced as the comments that Mr. Flowers had made in terms of digital technology. He talked about big data, he talked about automation and robotics, and he talked about visualization. We're not into robotics yet at Rosneft. We're probably not really into big data, but certainly we are starting to use some digital tools in our oil fields, but surely Mr. Flowers is right to suggest that compared to other industries, there's still some work that the oil and gas industry can do in this sphere. In terms of collaboration, the second theme, I always like to point people to a speech that my boss, Mr. Igor Sechin, made at the CIRA conference in 2012 in Houston. And it really was a very important speech because, in effect, he made a speech that said, Rosneft wants to do business with the world. And the interesting thing is if you actually look at what's happened since he's made that speech, Rosneft has probably become the preeminent global oil company in terms of collaborating with other industry participants. And we can talk about, obviously, BP having a 20% shareholder and being a partner in some of our projects in Russia, and Exxon, and the majors. But we can also talk about India. And I think 2016 has been a very important year for Rosneft and the collaboration of Russia and India. And I think there's been two kind of dimensions to this. The first, which has happened already, which is where all the major Indian oil companies, Oil India, India Oil, Bharat, ONGC, have taken ownership positions in our Siberian oil fields, Vankor and TAS Iraq. And the scale of investment is substantial. If you then look at what we, Rosneft, are doing, we signed a sale and purchase agreement where we are hoping in the next few weeks to close purchasing the Vadanar oil refinery, which, as you know, is one of the top 10 refineries in the world. And I think this partnership is very strategic. Your oil minister has talked about this as being an energy bridge. My boss has talked about a new form of structure of integration where this is a global integrated energy chain. This is an important approach that Rosneft is taking as to how we're addressing the challenges that the upstream industry faces. And we certainly think that collaboration with partners is a key element of how we're addressing things. We have now, we're ahead of time. I don't know whether the organizers would like us to have questions, or if there's any members of the audience who would like to say anything, address any questions. I don't know if we have microphones that can be given to people. Is there anybody who would like to address a question? If there are no hand microphones, maybe you're going to have to come and speak at the podium.
Yeah, hi sir, good morning. I have a question for you. Given that OPEC and Russia's, do you think that the announced cut has handed other producers like the Western majors a market share at a higher price?
Look, I think one of the things I always like to say to people is that in my lifetime, nobody has ever predicted oil prices consistently, correctly. And anyone who knows such a person, I'd love to meet them. Look, I think the one thing that we've talked about in this session today is the challenges and unpredictability of the market. And OPEC is clearly a big part of the market, so are other producers. I think certainly my personal view is that we will see the market forces that are going to shape the oil price much more than, as my fellow speaker said earlier, there have been attempts to control the market in the past. Obviously they've been successful, but increasingly that's looking more and more difficult. Any other questions from members of the audience, or anybody like to share on our topic? Okay. With that, then, I declare this session closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our panelists. May we request you to please step forward for a group photograph. May I request the speakers of the session to please step forward for a group photograph, sir. So for a group photograph, may I request you just to stand in front of the head table, please. Ladies and gentlemen, may we request you to remain at your seats, for we are going to be announcing the Petrotech Quiz Awards. As you know, there was an online quiz which was on. We're going to be announcing those awards. I'm sure many of you who are moving out must be the winners. So remain at your respective seats. And let me just again remind you that 11 o'clock we have an important session, that is a ministerial conclave, which is going to be chaired by Shri Nitin Gadkari, the Honourable Minister for Road Transport, Highways and Shipping. We are also going to be during that session joined by Shri Suresh Prabhu, the Honourable Minister for Railways. Also joining us will be Shri Anil Madhav Dave, the Honourable Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And we also will be joined by Shri Piyush Goyal ji, the Honourable Minister for Coal, Power, New and Renewable Energy, and the Minister of Mines, along with our Minister, Shri Dharmendra Pradhan ji, the Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas. The information which we received that the Honourable Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, Shri N. Chandrababu Naidu ji, will not be able to join us, and that is again he's leaving for Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and that's the reason he won't be able to join us in that session. But we have our own ministers, the Union Cabinet ministers, who are going to be joining to share in their key initiatives and measures towards transforming India. That's the session at 11. So as you move out also, we would like to request you to take your seats 10 minutes to 11 so that we are ready to welcome our distinguished speakers of the ministerial conclave.